Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
Arctic coastal communities are scrambling to repair homes, businesses, and protective infrastructure from the damage caused by the fierce Bering Sea storm in September before winter sets in.
See it all the time in Louisiana, Florida, but then you never thought it would happen here.
What is the status of the recovery effort, and how do communities access state and federal funds to assist? We'll discuss it right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. Tonight we'll get an update on damage assessments for Alaska communities that were hit by the remnants of Typhoon Merbok in September. How extensive was the loss to homes and families and subsistence gear, and what can realistically be accomplished for repairs before frigid temperatures stop that work until next spring? Our guests will help clarify what's been done and what will have to wait. Before we have that conversation, let's start off with some of this week's top stories from Alaska Public Media's collaborative statewide news network. For the first time ever, the Bering Sea snow crab fishery will not open. Alaska's Department of Fish and Game announced the closure earlier this week. The Bristol Bay red king crab fishery will also be closed this year for a second year in a row. Miranda Westfall, an area management biologist with Alaska's Department of Fish and Game, said the sudden decline in snow crab came as a shock to biologists. The quota was down about 90% from 2020. This year's population numbers were even worse, prompting the fishery's closure. Westfall says biologists suspect warmer ocean conditions caused by climate change may be partly to blame for the collapse. 15 people have died in Alaska jails and prisons so far this year, including 20-year-old Kitty Douglas. 9 out of 15 were under 40 years old. The Alaska Department of Corrections hasn't had this many deaths in one calendar year since 2015. It's unclear what's behind this year's high and why 7 people died within 2 weeks of going into custody. The department hasn't published the causes of death, with the exception of 91-year-old James Patrick Wheeler. His death in July was related to COVID-19. The Department of Corrections says it can't disclose much about what led up to the other 14 deaths. They're limited by confidentiality policies and health privacy laws. Travelers can now book mid-November flights on Aleutian Airways between Anchorage and Unalaska, the airline announced this week. The new carrier arrives as Unalaska residents have faced $1,000 one-way airfares to Anchorage, which has affected issues ranging from school sports teams travel to healthcare decisions. Non-stop flights on the company's Saab 2000 aircraft are set to begin November 16th, with 2 flights per day, Monday through Friday. The new regional airline will increase service to the island beginning December 26th. You can find the full versions of these stories and many more on our website, alaskapublic.org, or by downloading the Alaska Public Media app on your phone. Now, in the lead up to our discussion this evening on the recovery efforts that are happening in communities along the Bering Sea coast, we'll first take a quick look at the historic strength of the storm through the observations of Alaskans who were directly in its path. When the remnants of Typhoon Merbok slammed into the coast on a mid-September weekend, damage tore across hundreds of miles of Alaska's coastline, affecting communities all along the way. Alaskans described water flooding homes and roads, wind tore off roofs, houses floated off their foundations, and boats sank.
The damage from Typhoon Merbok was really overwhelming. We had never seen storm surges that came up so high.
Communities like Shaktoolik and Golovin, with a coastline more vulnerable to future storm surges after protective berms and sand dunes were destroyed. Joining me tonight to discuss recovery efforts and how affected families and businesses can get help is FEMA Deputy Coordinating Officer Yolanda Jackson, and also joining this evening is Senator Donnie Olson of Golovin. Senator Olson knows all too well how extensive the damage was in some communities. Golovin got hit very hard. Thank you both so much for being here this evening, and especially for taking time when I know there's so much work to be done and everybody's involved in making repairs right now. Senator Olson, I want to start with you. How is the recovery work going in Golovin? You said waves knocked down your front door and left 3 feet of sand inside. Have you been able to get all of the sand out? And it looks like you're moved back into your house now.
Actually, we're up on the upper floor of the dwelling that we have here. And thank you very much for having me on your show. I think it's a very important time in our history for us looking at what has happened as we prepare for what's going to be happening in the future, as well as taking care of what's has happened already and has affected people in a very vulnerable way. People that are young families that are very much affected. The 3 houses here in Golovin that were completely moved off their foundations and wound up on the high road, which is essentially in the middle of the street. We're blocking traffic. So it's one of those things that we are making progress on, but a lot of things have to be done.
Senator, how you've lived there for many, many years. How does it compare to past storm intensity?
Yeah, I'm almost 70 years old, and I've never seen it quite so bad as this. As was pointed out by the mayor early in the film clip, the water came up very fast and to unprecedented levels. I never thought I'd see it come up this high ever before. And I've never seen it come up this high ever before and thought it was going to be as high as it was. But it certainly came with a force that some of us weren't prepared for. And because of that, we had the devastating losses that we had here in the community, with houses not just floating away and floating around, but also houses that were on fairly firm foundations and were shifted to a certain degree where water, plumbing, water supply, as well as electricity was interrupted, causing some significant problems. One of which was 2 young families were severely affected. One of the houses they tried to move back into place the other day, and while their lifting efforts were there, the house essentially disintegrated in front of us that were watching.
Just heartbreaking. Well, thank you, Senator, for getting us started there. We're having a little bit of internet connection trouble, but I'm not surprised, coming from Golovin, that maybe we would have some issues here and there. So thank you so much for being with us. Yolanda, I want to turn to you now. FEMA inspectors have been visiting affected communities. Do you have an idea of how many communities have had damage documented, and what's the current status of repairs in them?
So thank you for having me. So we have survivors in the regional educational attendance areas, Bering Strait, Cashinamute, Lower Kuskokwim, and the Lower Yukon were all affected by the severe storm that occurred between the 15th and the 20th about. All of those survivors could apply for the state of Alaska and FEMA disaster assistance. So we are running these joint efforts here. We've got, as you mentioned, the state of Alaska and FEMA representatives on the ground traveling to all those affected villages and areas to help those survivors apply. We're performing inspections. We have currently about 563 registered applicants currently. We've approved about $2.4 million right now in assistance from the federal side. That's about $856,000 in housing. We've also got other needs, $1.5 million, right? So that's all that assistance going out to those survivors right now, trying again to support getting them back on their feet before that big freeze, right? So the sense of urgency is there. We've got FEMA inspectors in those villages, on the ground in Bethel and Nome. That's where we go out to those hubs, and then they go and visit those surrounding villages that were all affected by the storm. One thing I want to mention too is we have established an Alaska-specific disaster hotline. It is staffed in Anchorage, right? And I mentioned that I heard in the the montage here when we started. One of the survivors mentioned you see stuff in Puerto Rico and the hurricanes and stuff like that. We saw that here in Alaska. So we decided to staff that disaster hotline here in Anchorage. So survivors are encouraged to call, and that number is 1-866-342-1699. They can visit Alaska, or they can visit disasterassistance.gov, or they can use the FEMA mobile app. But as you see with the senator, depending on where you're at, connectivity is limited there. So we have that hotline set up. Again, 1-866-342-1699.
And we are going to be featuring that number a little later on during the program, and also we'll link to the places that people can go on the Alaska Insight page for accessing that assistance.
Absolutely.
So Yolanda, following up there, once the governor makes a federal disaster declaration request and that's approved, FEMA supports the state in recovery efforts. Describe how that assessment field work goes in community. What is the process for ensuring that people in communities have the right documentation to get that financial support?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because the documentation is very important. And again, the first step is calling that hotline and talking to those customer service representatives and ensuring you know what you need to provide to them. We also, I want to mention, we do have FEMA tribal specialists that are also engaged as well. We support some of the different language and translations too. I do want to mention some of the specific items that you will need to be able to apply for assistance, like information on your income. Any homeowners or renters insurance is critical as well, if applicable. Information on damage to your residence, proof of occupancy. That could be like a lease or a rental agreement, a statement, a bank statement or a pay stub, a utility bill, but even an official letter from a tribal community leader. That's also helpful as well.
And should they have pictures?
Yeah, any
before, if they have some before pictures, is that helpful?
Any of that information is helpful. And again, the folks that are staffing that hotline, they're there to help and walk you through that process, and we'll really talk to you. Those case managers are great in helping you through that process.
Senator, housing is always chronically short in rural areas. After, as you were mentioning, some of the homes were completely destroyed. Where are those families staying now?
Unfortunately, they're staying with relatives that are here in Golovin specifically, as well as other communities in their surrounding areas. The problem with that is that those houses usually are already overcrowded. And because of that, this adds to the overcrowding problem that we do have with, especially with younger kids, younger children that are not even in school yet. They still need to be taken care of, and that makes the housing problem even more acute.
Absolutely. We're going to look at some more footage now of the storm's aftermath and the destruction that it left. See firsthand the extent of the destruction. In Chivak, reporter Emily Schwing captured photo and video of extensive damage to boats and fishing gear, and reported on how the community was pulling together to help each other through it.
But this was a pretty significant storm, and so a lot of elements of livelihoods were impacted, and it's not just homes, it's a wide-ranging impact, and so we need to make sure that all components that may have been affected by the storm are being taken care of.
All components that were affected. Yolanda, people who didn't experience damage to their homes can still get assistance for damage related to their livelihoods. This means boats, freezers, nets, other subsistence gear. Is this a new area of compensation for FEMA to recognize that these are not recreational items, these are tools for people's survival?
So immediately after the storm, our FEMA leadership from our administrator, Deanne Criswell, our regional administrator, Willie Nunn, came out. They went out to the areas that were impacted, discussed with community leaders, really taking into account the subsistence and the importance of the culture, what that meant to the culture of Alaskans here. And we have critical needs assistance for those survivors. It's a one-time $700 payment, and that's eligible for households, for life-saving, life-sustaining items. There's also including a shipping supplement of $1,300, and that's in the form of like a housing grant to cover any additional cost of transporting or repair materials, supplies for eligible survivors as well. If you've already applied for that and you've received FEMA assistance with this additional amount, you can also get a supplemental for that as well to include that transportation cost. We know how hard it is to get stuff up there as well. As far as the damaged subsistence items, such as like fishing equipment, ATVs, boats, outboard motors, smokehouses, snowmobiles, all of those items are also included as part of that as well. So.
And is there a cap on how much compensation can be made in that regard? Because some of the fishing equipment and boats and motors are at great cost. And how will people prove those losses if some of that equipment that they need to replace has been lost to sea? So
that's why it's really important for survivors to apply for both FEMA and the state. We both have individual assistance programs, and they may provide assistance for housing repairs and replacement of personal property, including those subsistence items that one or the other may not, be approved for. So just really quick example, the state assistance may cover damage that FEMA cannot. So FEMA may provide funding for like contents of fish camps, but cannot provide grants for damaged or destroyed camp structures, something like that. Okay. So really make sure that you're also applying for the state grant and also the FEMA, or the state program and the FEMA program. That would be to make sure that you're getting everything covered for.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And here is the information on the new hotline number specific to the Alaska disaster. This was created after Alaskans complained about hours-long wait times on hold due to the Florida disaster. So this is an Alaska-specific number. Senator, you mentioned one family that had harvested 2 moose. They had them all processed and frozen and ready for winter, but seawater inundation ruined the meat. There has also been fish and berries and other harvested food that was destroyed. Financial assistance can help buy store food, but help us understand the emotional and cultural loss when all of that hard work and security of traditional food is lost?
Well, I think that that's a very important question, partly because those of us that live out here in rural Alaska are fairly independently minded and like the idea that we can go out and live off the land if we have to. And when we have put away things like berries and fish and moose meat, it makes us feel like we can continue on with that lifestyle like our families did for all the years that they didn't have public assistance like FEMA and other entities out there. And so I think it's emotionally, it's one of those gratifying things where you can provide for your family, show your children how to go ahead and hunt, show them how to go ahead and fish, show them how to go ahead and pick berries and pick greens off the tundra. And so I think from that standpoint, it's one of those things that certainly we can supplement that with financial help from buying things from the store. But in order to go ahead and be able to have it to its fullest like we have had in the past, it's much more fulfilling to have it where you've actually gone out there, hunted the moose, shot the moose, carried it back in. Same thing with berries, gone out with a boat and picked the berries or picked the fish as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yolanda, FEMA's biggest program is the individual and household assistance. What does that offer? You talked a little about this earlier, but does it matter if people have private insurance coverage for storm damage, or if they don't have anything like that? Because most people probably don't.
So with the individual assistance program, again, we do provide assistance for housing repairs and replacement of that personal property, but we do take into account any insurance payouts that you may have. So again, by calling that helpline that you all are going to provide for the folks there, if you do have insurance, provide that. If you don't have insurance, we take that into account as well. We also work with the Small Business Association. So we are also offering those low income or those low interest loans as well. So if you don't have insurance, that's also an avenue for folks to get back on their feet too.
When you say low interest, what are the interest rates for something like that?
So residents who apply for disaster assistance from FEMA could also be referred to SBA to apply for those low interest loans, very low disaster loans. They've got the long-term low interest disaster loans for business, nonprofits, homeowners, and even renters as well. Those can cover losses that are not fully compensated by insurance or other sources. So we do have information. You can call the SBA's customer service. They can give you a lot more information there. That number is 1-800-659-2955. And those SBA folks are also working with, that's part of our interagency coordination there. The SBA works really closely with FEMA and the state too.
So no clarity really on what the interest rate might be at this point, but.
And they also have a website that folks can also go to. That's disasterloanassistance.sba.gov. And again, that's part of that interagency coordination there. So FEMA, the state, SBA, we're all working together to try to get folks back on their feet.
And you coordinate with tribes and Alaska Native corporations. Are there people being trained to help offer this assistance? There's people have to apply for funds. The deadline is November 22nd, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. We do have those FEMA tribal specialists that expertly trained in supporting our tribal corporations, working directly with the state as well to better facilitate the coordination of all the federal resources that are available to the tribes. We have interagency recovery partners. That is the American Red Cross. We've got, our Coast Guard is here. We have all the different partners coming together. And really it's prioritizing the needs of our tribal partners. And what I've always found is asking, right? We never assume we know what you need. And I found that to be uniquely true working with different tribal partners. It's you ask the question. Well, they'll tell you what you need. And Alaskans are very unique in that way as well. Living in the lower 48, you come to Alaska, Alaskans will tell you what they need right up front. They're very resilient in that way.
Senator, what are your observations about how tribal and Native corporation officials are helping out for community members right now?
I want to go ahead and compliment the FEMA representatives there that have been very responsive, and I've heard nothing but praise from the people here in Golovin especially, as well as the surrounding areas, the constituents I have in my Senate district, who are saying that the specific hotline that they have for them, the Alaska-centric number that's there, the people that are answering the phones seem to understand how important these fish camps are that have been wiped out. Where when I've gone over there with a helicopter and looked at some of the places, all I see is flooring and a clothesline, and other than that, everything else is gone. And so with that, I want to thank those entities, FEMA in particular, for being so adapting to the uniqueness we have up here. But as far as what we've seen so far, I think the response that Governor Dunleavy has been by a couple times, Senator Murkowski has been by twice already. She brought one of the heads of FEMA up here, one of the directors, as well as Mary Peltola, the congressperson from down in Bethel, has been by. And next week we plan on having Senator Sullivan come on up and take a look to see some of the devastation that is here. So with that in mind, I think they've been very responsive. I know that when we looked at one of the problems that we had here in Golovin was we lost the power plant, which is down here on the lower part of the Golovin, and they had to shut the power down. And so because of that, they were able to, the Native Corporation as well as the Bering Straits Native Corporation as well as Norton Sound were able to go ahead and put generators, a packet of generators together, extension cords and fans, so that we were able to go ahead and provide ourselves power if there was another power outage.
And in about 30 seconds, Senator, on Talk of Alaska earlier this month, we talked about the storm and the damage, and an email came in from a listener who said, when are we going to cut our losses and move everybody off the coast? How do you respond to comments like that for people who have lived in these areas for thousands of years?
It's troubling that there's that attitude out there that, if you don't like where you're at, or it's too expensive where you're at, the price of oil or price of petroleum products is too high, then move to Anchorage, where they got cheap natural gas. Well, we've seen what happened to people down there in Anchorage. You get a big homeless population, you get people that are without skills because they can't afford to go and live in the city, and because of that, you have these real problems, real social problems with even young children that are now essentially
Yes.
homeless there in metropolitan areas.
So people want to stay where they are, where they've been for generations. Thank you so much, Senator Olson. Good luck with the ongoing recovery efforts. Thank you, Yolanda, for being with us tonight as well and the work you're doing. Winter is closing in fast, and getting applications in before the November deadline for financial assistance will be critical for communities, families, and businesses along the western Bering Sea coast to get the help they'll need to have safe housing and services through the long winter season. Links to where to access that help are on the Alaska Insight page. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. We'll be off for the next 2 weeks to bring you the Debate for the State series. The governor's debate will be on Wednesday, October 19th. The U.S. House debate is Wednesday, October 26th, and the U.S. Senate is Thursday, the 27th. All airing live statewide from 7 to 8 p.m. We hope you'll join us. And be sure to tune in daily to your local public radio station for Alaska Morning News and Alaska News Nightly every weeknight. Be part of important conversations happening on Talk of Alaska every Tuesday, and visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news from across the state. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.